For years my father-in-law mocked me, told everyone I was a nobody. What he didn't know was that I secretly controlled the fate of his entire company, and one day I decided to let it fall. Hey everyone, glad you're here. Thanks for coming back. I've got a fresh story to open up about today. So here goes. My name's Ethan Thorne, I'm 37 years old, and for over a decade now, I've been quietly building my own private equity firm out of Denver, Colorado. The work I do is meant to be invisible, by design. Most of my investments are cloaked behind layers of corporate shells, hidden in anonymous trusts and tucked into holding companies so obscure that even seasoned attorneys need months to trace a thread back to me. That's exactly how I prefer it, discreet, untouchable, controlled. But in this moment, standing in my father-in-law's kitchen while he swings his coffee mug like he's conducting some bitter symphony of judgment, I felt the exact opposite of powerful. I felt exposed. "You're nothing but garbage, Ethan," Arthur Caldwell snapped, his voice louder this time like he wanted the walls to hear it too. My daughter could have done a whole lot better. I was leaning against the fridge, one hand resting on the cool slab of marble, the other loosely wrapped around a coffee mug I hadn't even taken a sip from. I didn't need to hear this again, I already knew the lines. He never changed them. Same tired insults, just recycled through birthdays, Christmas dinners, and awkward Sunday brunches for the last 3 years. "She could have married Dr. Miller's boy," he muttered, pointing a finger in the air like he was highlighting some lost business opportunity, as if my existence was a financial misstep. His eyes flicked toward Sophia, my wife, who was sitting quietly at the breakfast table, slowly dragging her fork in aimless circles through her plate of scrambled eggs. She didn't say anything. Didn't look up. Just kept swirling those eggs like maybe they held some secret code to why our marriage had started to unravel. Arthur let out a short, bitter laugh. "But no, she picked you," he said with a disgusted shake of his head. "A man too cowardly to even say what he actually does for a living." "Ethan works in finance, Dad," Sophia murmured, eyes still locked on her plate, her voice barely audible. "Finance?" Arthur barked, spinning around dramatically like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You know what that means? It means absolutely nothing. For all we know, you're out there selling insurance," Arthur sneered. "Maybe managing retirement portfolios in some rundown office tucked behind a strip mall." I exhaled slowly, trying to let his words bounce off me instead of sink in. His voice echoed off the sleek surfaces of the kitchen like he was delivering a keynote at some corporate summit. He kept pacing around the granite-topped island, face flushed with a cocktail of ego and frustration, his bare feet stuffed into designer loafers that smacked the hardwood with each step, like each insult deserved its own period. "That was Arthur Caldwell for you, the big man in the room. Founder and CEO of Ether Labs, a biotech firm that's been on life support for the last 4 years. No real profits. Just press releases and posturing." His company was barely keeping its head above water, despite the title on his LinkedIn. What he didn't know, and what made his rants almost laughable, was that I'd been quietly watching his company's books for the past 8 months. Keeping tabs on every filing, every quarterly burn report. Ether Labs wasn't just struggling, they were circling the drain. They were running out of venture capital, bleeding cash, and running out of time. The kind of desperate situation that cried out for a faceless investor to step in and keep the lights on. The kind of deal I handled in silence, behind layers of paperwork. My specialty. "You just sit there like some mute," Arthur spat, stabbing a finger at my chest. "Real men don't stay silent. Real men fight back." I met his eyes and gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Caldwell." For a moment the kitchen went still. You could feel the shift. Sophia looked up from her eggs, the confusion in her expression flashing like a warning light. Even Arthur seemed caught off guard. The fire in his voice flickered. I am right," he muttered, but the usual venom had dulled. "Totally," I said, standing up, pushing my chair back with quiet finality. I reached for my jacket hanging on the back of the chair. "Sophia deserves better." I could feel their stares trailing me as I walked across the room. Every step echoed louder than it should have, my shoes clicking sharply against the tile like something out of a courtroom. Just as I reached the door, I heard the scrape of a chair behind me. "Ethan, wait," Sophia said, her voice fragile, almost unsure. But I didn't stop. I stepped outside into the sharp November air, letting it bite into my skin and flood my lungs. It felt like breathing in fire, but not the kind that burns. The kind that cleanses. Above me the sky hung low and gray, swollen with the promise of the season's first snow. My hands were trembling, not out of rage but with the certainty that this was the moment where everything broke open. The silent architect was finally stepping into the light. I first crossed paths with Sophia 5 years ago at a conference up in Boulder. She was giving a talk on some cutting-edge gene therapy research, standing up there with the kind of confidence and clarity that made the whole room lean in. She was sharp, no question. Smart, poised, and totally absorbed in her work at a small biotech company. There was something magnetic about the way she spoke, like she believed every word could change lives. I'd shown up to that conference with investment in mind. I was there to scout opportunities in medical tech, not romance. But I didn't walk away thinking about market potential. I walked away thinking about her. Things between us took off quickly. In hindsight, maybe too quickly. 18 months after that first meeting, we were standing side by side in front of a handful of close friends and family, exchanging vows at a quiet vineyard just outside of Golden. Small, intimate. Just the way we said we wanted it. Arthur, of course, had opinions. Loud ones. He spent weeks grumbling about the wedding. Said it lacked sophistication. He'd envisioned something grand, a cathedral, tuxedos, champagne fountains, the whole country club spectacle. Something he could show off to his buddies like a prize stock pick. But Sophia and I, at least back then, valued simplicity. Or maybe I just assumed she did. The cracks started to show that first Christmas we spent as husband and wife. Arthur had a little too much red wine, Merlot I think, and decided it was the perfect time to grill me about my work. He never asked with curiosity, only suspicion. I gave him the same measured answers I offered everyone else. Private investments, portfolio management, consulting for a handful of high-net-worth clients. All technically true. What I left out was the most important piece. I was one of those clients. My own firm, Sentinel Ventures, had grown to oversee more than $200 million in assets. We specialized in early-stage investments, particularly in tech and biotech startups, exactly the sort of companies that required a quiet presence and careful hands. I'd built my success by staying behind the curtain, by letting others take the spotlight while I moved pieces in the background. I liked it that way. Low profile. High return. I didn't want fame, I wanted freedom. But Arthur didn't respect subtlety. He saw it as weakness. He'd swirl his wine glass like he was sniffing out fraud, narrow his eyes across the dinner table like I was a shady deal waiting to collapse. Still keeping that little mystery job of yours a secret, Ethan? He'd sneer as if he were just teasing, but it never landed like a joke. Sophia would let out a tight chuckle, the kind you give when you're trying to keep the peace. Sometimes she'd change the subject, redirect the conversation to anything less tense, holiday plans, work stories, the weather. Anything but me. When the conversation got uncomfortable, Sophia would try to smooth things over with small talk. Weather updates, traffic reports, even university research grants. She'd do everything but ask him to stop. Not once did she ever stand up for me or for herself. That silence? It was deafening. But what cut the deepest wasn't just Arthur's words. It was watching the way Sophia changed in response to them. The confident, brilliant woman I'd fallen head over heels for started to shrink into herself during those long dinners. Bit by bit. Her voice softened, her opinions quieted. She used to light up a room when she spoke about her work. Now she barely spoke at all when her father was around. After the more brutal nights, she'd pull me aside when we got home, eyes wide with guilt, like a child apologizing for someone else's bad behavior. "I'm sorry," she'd whisper. "He'll settle down. Just give it time." But the time came and went and it never changed. She never confronted him. Never asked him to stop. It was like we were all playing roles in a carefully scripted drama. And the silence, hers, was as calculated as his cruelty. Then 3 months ago something shifted. I was reviewing a slate of medical companies, startups and established firms alike, for potential investment. One of them was Ether Labs. Quietly, I had my analysts pull the full set of financials, hoping to assess the real state of things without drawing attention. What I found didn't surprise me, but it did disappoint. The debt-to-revenue ratio alone would send most experienced investors running. Even the more aggressive venture capital firms gave it a look and quickly walked away. That's when it hit me. I had a choice. I could step in and quietly rescue Arthur's company through one of my shadow investment vehicles. I could turn his failing business into a salvageable opportunity, take control and maybe even profit from it. Or I could do nothing. Let the company fail under its own weight. No fingerprints. No mess. The investor in me saw opportunity. A distressed asset in a familiar space. Leverage, equity, and the long game of control. But the part of me that married Sophia, the part of me who had sat through years of disdain at her family dinners, saw something else. A warning sign. A reckoning. So I started the due diligence. Quietly. And in the meantime life carried on. Birthdays, dinner parties, and celebrations that felt more like stage productions than real life. It was at Arthur's retirement dinner that the last thread snapped. He'd rented out a whole banquet hall, complete with a string quartet, candlelit centerpieces, and a guest list stacked with everyone he wanted to impress. Sophia's uncle Harold was there, the cardiac surgeon with a perpetual tan and a habit of name-dropping his Aspen vacation home. He always seemed to know exactly when to mention it, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Sophia was smiling, cutting the cake, looking genuinely happy for once when Arthur raised his glass. "Harold just bought a new boat," he said with a wide grin. Harold laughed like he was being modest. Arthur leaned in, milking it. "A 40-foot yacht," he announced, raising his eyebrows, scanning the crowd. "Cost more than what most people make in 5 years." I smiled politely, trying to keep the tension from rising up my neck. Sophia gave me a look, subtle but clear. A gentle signal. Stay calm. But Arthur wasn't finished. Of course not. He tapped his fork against his wine glass for attention and said, "I mean, let's be honest here. My daughter is a world-class scientist," Arthur announced to the room like he was delivering the keynote at a gala. "Published in top medical journals. Invited to speak at global conferences. She could have had her pick, married a surgeon, a corporate lawyer, someone with a future." He waved a lazy hand toward my side of the table, like gesturing toward a parking lot full of used cars. But instead, she settled. That's where his voice stopped. No name, no title, just silence. Like I didn't even deserve to be mentioned. A mistake, an afterthought. "Well," he added with a dramatic sip of wine, "we all make mistakes." It was strange, the room didn't go quiet, not really. Conversations kept bubbling around us, cutlery tapped against china, the quartet played on. But everything in me froze. Not because Arthur's cruelty was new, but because I looked at Sophia and for the first time I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't angry. She was embarrassed. Not by her father's behavior, but by me. Embarrassed that this was what she'd married. A man her father looked down on. A man she didn't feel the need to defend. That's when it hit me, this wasn't ever going to get better. She wasn't going to push back because part of her agreed with him. Maybe not completely, maybe not in every word he said, but just enough to keep quiet. Just enough to let me stand alone, again and again, while he tore into me in front of her friends, her family, her. I stood slowly, folding my napkin with deliberate care and setting it beside my untouched plate. My thoughts were loud and clear for the first time in months. All the dinners I'd endured. All the smiles I'd forced. All the times I'd bitten my tongue until it ached. None of it mattered. 4 months I'd been preparing a $15 million investment package for Ether Labs. It wasn't some half-hearted gesture. It was the real deal. Comprehensive due diligence, deep dives into their financials, clinical trial outlooks, and IP holdings. The whole thing had been wrapped with a bow, every document reviewed, every clause negotiated. All it needed was one signature. Mine. That night, I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car without turning off the engine. 10 full minutes passed as I stared at the warm glow of the porch light, wondering how many more lies I was willing to live inside. The next morning, I made the call to my legal team. I asked them to prepare 3 things: a formal notice of withdrawal from investment consideration in Ether Labs, a legal termination of the draft funding agreement, and a conditional confidentiality release. I wanted the option to reveal, publicly if needed, that I had been the silent investor all along. Later that day, I sat in my attorney's office, him tapping a pen against his desk, eyeing me like he was trying to gauge whether I was bluffing. "You sure about this, Ethan?" he asked quietly. "You've put months into this deal. The numbers, the contracts." I nodded once. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure." "The fundamentals are solid," my attorney said, leaning back in his chair. "This could still be a highly profitable deal, if you can look past the family drama." I met his eyes, steady and resolved. "I can't," I said. "I'm sure." That quiet, unwavering statement hit harder than any fiery speech I could have made. And it said more than any formal rejection letter ever could. That evening around 8, Sophia came home. She'd been staying at her sister Megan's place since Arthur's birthday dinner. The moment she stepped through the door, I knew something was off. Her eyes were red and puffy, makeup long faded. Her posture sagged, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't yet figured out how to set down. "We need to talk," she said softly, sitting down in the chair across from mine in the living room. I closed the laptop in my lap without a word. For a second I almost thought I knew where this was headed. Maybe she was ready to apologize, to talk about boundaries, to say she'd finally had enough of her father's endless attacks. But she thought this was just about hurt feelings. Just bruised egos and awkward dinners. She had no idea her father had just insulted the one person who held the future of his company in their hands. "Sophia," I said, my voice quieter now, steady but tired. "How long have you been ashamed of me?" She flinched like the question had slapped her. Her lips parted slightly. "What? I'm not, Ethan, I'm not ashamed of you." I didn't look away. "Then why haven't you ever told your father to stop?" "Not once. Not in 3 years." She hesitated. "He doesn't mean it the way it sounds. He's just protective. He called me worthless trash. In front of you. In front of your family. You sat there and stirred your eggs like nothing happened." "I love you," she said quickly, like it would fix everything. "I know," I replied. "But love isn't enough if you won't fight for it." That was the truth I couldn't ignore anymore. She might have loved me, but not enough to protect me. Not enough to push back. And the silence, the inaction, somehow hurt more than all the names Arthur had ever hurled at me. She stayed for about an hour. Neither of us said much after that. We just sat there in the same room, the distance between us growing larger by the minute. It wasn't the couch or the coffee table dividing us, it was everything else. And when she finally stood, grabbed her coat and walked toward the door, I let her go. I didn't say a word. Because I knew, deep down, I wouldn't be seeing her again. Not really. Even if we stayed married, even if we signed up for therapy and had long, hard conversations, a piece of her would always see me through her father's eyes. And that piece would never go away. The next morning, I got a call from Sophia. Her voice was shaky, panicked. "Something's happened," she said. I didn't answer. Just waited. "My dad's company," she said, almost breathless. "They just lost their biggest investor. $15 million, gone. Overnight." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words linger. She was unraveling, her voice brittle, edged with something close to panic. He's falling apart," she said finally, like the admission itself hurt. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, calm and measured. She let out a shaky breath, the kind that sounded like it had been held in all day. "The lawyers won't tell him who pulled out. They're saying it was an anonymous investment group, but now they're citing confidentiality terms. Breach of agreement, something like that. He's talking about bankruptcy, Ethan." I didn't respond. Just listened. To the silence between her words. To the soft, rhythmic inhale and exhale on the other end of the line. She wasn't asking for comfort, she was reaching for control and finding none. The night before I had written 2 emails. One for Arthur. One for Sophia. No anger. No theatrics. Just the truth, clean, direct, and laced with cold formality. Every word deliberate. I scheduled both to be sent the following morning at exactly 10 a.m. And right on schedule, Mark Jennings, my attorney, would send a third message. Short. Final. Impossible to overlook. By the end of the day, they would both know exactly who had been behind the curtain all along. The faceless investor. The one man Arthur had humiliated across 3 years of dinners. The man Sophia had sat silently beside. That evening I opened the Ether Labs file again. I didn't need to, I already knew every figure, every misstep, but something in me needed to see it one last time. Needed confirmation that I hadn't walked away out of spite. The numbers were there, plain as daylight. A rushed product launch in the pharma division. Development costs ballooning close to $3 million. Market testing skipped. Risk protocols ignored. And when it went sideways, when the failure became too big to hide, Arthur didn't own it. He didn't reevaluate. He didn't pause. He blamed the research team. Fired 3 senior scientists. And doubled down, reaching out to new investors to cover the crater he'd made. But what turned my stomach the most, what made it all sit heavier than before, was the memo. Sophia had written it. I'd come across it during due diligence. A clear, detailed analysis warning that the product wasn't market ready. She hadn't just disagreed with the launch, she had documented exactly why it was a dangerous move. She saw the fault lines before they cracked. And Arthur ignored her. Bulldozed over her. Replaced facts with arrogance. And I, finally, saw it for what it really was. This wasn't just business. It was a pattern. A legacy of steamrolling anything that didn't mirror his ego. Even his daughter. I sat with that realization for a long while. Just stared at the screen, letting the weight of it settle over everything I'd known about their family. And then I picked up the phone. There was one person who might still have the missing pieces. One voice that might finally confirm what I already suspected deep down. Dr. Lena Reed. She'd left Ether Labs around the same time Sophia did. Lena Reed and I had crossed paths a few times at industry events over the years, panel discussions, networking mixers, investor briefings. She wasn't the type to mince words. That's what I remembered most about her. She said what needed saying no matter who was in the room. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Lena, this is Ethan Thorne." A beat of silence, then, "Sophia's husband?" She didn't need context. She knew why I was calling. "She's one of the best scientists I've worked with," Lena said without prompting. "Sharp mind. Grounded in data. That team had real potential. But Arthur?" Her voice turned colder. "He should have never been anywhere near a biotech firm. He treats researchers like factory workers and makes decisions based on pride, not science." "Can you give me an example?" I asked. "The Neurotropin launch," she said. I knew the name. I'd seen it in the files, but it hadn't registered with weight until now. When the call ended, I stayed in my chair, staring at the softly glowing screen on my desk. The rest of the office was dark, bathed only in the pale light of my lamp. Outside, the city was exhaling into night, windows dimming one by one. But inside me something stayed lit, burning low and steady. Lena had told me the full story. Sophia had raised red flags about the Neurotropin data. She'd done her due diligence. Her memo had outlined concerns with clarity, dosing inconsistencies, patient safety risks, incomplete trials. She wasn't being difficult. She was being responsible. But it didn't matter. Arthur steamrolled ahead, ignored the warnings, launched the product anyway. The FDA rejected the approval, hard, and Ether Labs lost nearly $3 million in the aftermath. I remembered reading the headline when it hit the trade sites, not knowing Sophia had been in the center of it all. Arthur hadn't just dismissed her. He'd smeared her. Said she was too negative. Not a team player. Claimed she lacked the passion to see the company succeed. And slowly, steadily, he made her life inside that lab unbearable. Until she quit. Until she walked away from the work she loved. And no one spoke up. No one defended her. Not a word. Because Arthur wasn't the kind of man you contradicted. He didn't hear things he didn't want to hear. And somehow I'd nearly handed him a lifeline. $15 million. A golden parachute. It wasn't just a financial rescue, it would have been a reward. A stamp of approval. A confirmation that he could bulldoze everyone in his path and still come out on top. Still keep the legacy. Still keep control. And if I had gone through with it, Sophia would never have to face any of it. She could keep her world balanced, husband on one side, father on the other. Never forced to reckon with who he really was. Never pushed to pick a side. She could stay safe. Stay silent. Just like always. The next morning was set with precision. Mark had instructions to deliver the official termination letter to Ether Labs at exactly 10 a.m., not a minute before, not a second after. At that same moment, 2 messages would go out. One to Arthur. One to Sophia. I'd written them the night before, then scheduled them for delivery. My words sharpened to truth. Not rage. Not revenge. Just the facts. At 9:45 a.m., I picked up my phone and dialed Sophia's number. It rang twice. "Ethan," she answered softly. Her voice held a flicker of warmth, maybe even hope. "Is everything okay?" "I need to tell you something," I said. "Something important. But I need you to sit down first." She blinked, confused. "You're scaring me. I need you to listen closely. I haven't just been working with high-net-worth clients. My firm, Sentinel Ventures, manages over $200 million in assets. And for the past 8 months, I've been the anonymous investor your father's been trying to win over." The line went still. All I could hear was her breathing, rapid and shallow, like her body was trying to catch up with her thoughts. "This is a joke," she said finally. "Right? This is some kind of twisted joke." "No," I said steady. "Check your phone. In 12 minutes, you and your father will both receive a message from me confirming everything I just told you." She didn't move. Just stared, eyes wide, words caught behind her lips. "I should have defended you," she said suddenly. Her voice cracked at the edges. "I know that. I do. But Ethan, this is his company. His whole life. You can't take that away because you're angry." "This isn't about anger," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. "It's about respect. About consequences. Your father built an empire on intimidation and arrogance, and when it failed, he blamed the people trying to protect him." "Please," she whispered. "Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll talk to him. I'll make him apologize." It's too late for apologies. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. One sharp vibration. Then another. Right on schedule. I glanced down. Both messages had been delivered. The truth released. Final. 5 minutes later my phone rang again. It was Arthur. And he was screaming before I could even say hello. "You arrogant, smug little, you think this is funny? You think you can just ruin me? You think you can destroy everything I built? You pulled your investment because I hurt your feelings?" Arthur was practically growling through the phone. His voice was ragged, desperate, already teetering on the edge. I took a breath, kept my tone steady. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, "I think you've misunderstood the situation." "I've misunderstood nothing," he barked. "Sophia told me everything. You're the investor. You're the one who pulled out." "That's correct." There was a pause. His next words came out quieter, like the anger had slipped just enough to let fear in. 23 people work for me, Ethan." His voice wasn't booming anymore. It was smaller now, fragile. "What do you want?" he asked. "Money? An apology? What?" I looked down at the floor. My voice stayed level. "I want you to know what it feels like to need someone you've spent years convincing yourself is worthless." Then I ended the call, turned off my phone, and for the first time in years I felt done. No more performances. No more dinner table humiliations. No more silent pleading looks from the woman who wouldn't stand up for me. It was over. 3 days later, Sophia filed for divorce. She came to the house while I was at work, packed what she needed, and left without a note. When I got home, the closet was half empty. The air felt hollow. Lena called me later that week. She'd spoken to Sophia. Apparently, Sophia had finally confronted her father. Really confronted him. Brought up everything. His manipulation, his treatment of his employees, the pressure, the humiliation, all of it. When Arthur tried to defend himself, she didn't back down. She told him exactly what she thought of his decisions. Pushing faulty products to market, firing the people who dared to speak the truth, tearing down those closest to him until they left with nothing. Lena said their conversation ended with Sophia yelling into the phone. Her voice cracked when she told him that he hadn't just cost her a marriage, he'd ruined her work, her integrity, her sense of safety, and that she never wanted to see him again. After that, things moved fast. Arthur lost his lead funding source and the news spread quickly. In our world, reputations move faster than emails. His name started disappearing from advisory boards. Then came the layoffs, 8 employees, most of them from the research team. I'd met several of them at conferences. Smart, driven people who didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. Next came the closure of Ether Lab's secondary facility in Colorado. The building had been a promise of growth once. Now it was just another line in a long list of endings. By the time the week was out, people had stopped whispering and started speaking openly about the collapse. Headlines weren't shy anymore. One morning I saw it in the local business journal, "The Fall of a Giant, Ether's Future in Question." The article pulled no punches, diving into internal dysfunction, executive missteps, and the sudden disappearance of key funding. I read it slowly, not out of glee but out of closure. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth coming into the light. Later that week I asked Lena, somewhat rhetorically, "The country club?" She gave a dry smile. "Gone." I nodded. "The place in Vale?" "Sold," she said almost grimly. "Everything's being liquidated." One afternoon I happened to be driving on the edge of town. Not out of any need to see him, just coincidence. But I slowed down when I spotted him out front of his house. Arthur was on his knees in the flower bed. No gloves. No hat. Just dirt-caked hands tearing weeds from soil that used to be trimmed weekly by a landscaping crew. His shoulders slumped. His body, once full of energy and arrogance, looked smaller, weathered. It wasn't pity I felt. It was recognition. A man alone with his consequences. He still had a job, technically. Lena said one of his old friends found him a consulting position, one that came with no real authority. Just a title and a desk in a low-rent office complex near the airport. The kind of place he used to mock. The kind of address he'd once pointed to as proof that someone had failed. As for Sophia, she never reached out. Not directly. But I heard things. Friends we still shared would pass along updates without asking if I wanted them. One day, someone forwarded me a photo from a medical conference in San Diego. I opened it without thinking, and there she was, standing behind a podium, speaking mid-sentence. Her hands were animated, her eyes focused. That old spark, the one I hadn't seen in so long, was back. And for a brief moment I smiled. Because despite everything, despite the pain, the silence, and the betrayal, I wanted her to find her way again. To find herself again. And maybe, in walking away, I finally gave us both the space to do just that. She never returned to the house in Denver. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. There were too many echoes in those walls, words we couldn't take back, silences we should have broken. I stayed just long enough to pack what mattered. Then I left. Portland felt like a clean slate. I opened a new office for Sentinel Ventures there, tucked between the old brick buildings and the scent of wet pine. It was the right call. The Pacific Northwest had a quiet energy I hadn't realized I was missing. Clouded skies, crowded cafes filled with engineers and dreamers pitching ideas on shoestring budgets and caffeine. That's where I started to find myself again. The tech scene was raw, brilliant, sometimes a little too wide-eyed, but there was hope in it. Possibility. Not the polished kind I used to sell in boardrooms, but the kind that came from people who hadn't been broken yet. That hope was contagious. I didn't hear from Arthur again. I doubt I ever will. Maybe he's still out there trying to rebuild, still lecturing, still trying to scrape together the version of himself he thought the world owed him. I remember him at a gala once, years back, cornering me near the bar, swirling a glass of whiskey like it held ancient wisdom. He told me I needed to be more aggressive. Respect, he said, isn't given, it's taken. But that wasn't true. I know that now. Respect isn't something you demand. It's not inherited. It's not about who shouts loudest or wears the most expensive watch. It's earned slowly in the quiet moments, when no one's watching, when no one's clapping. It's earned by how you treat people when you think they're beneath you. And that, more than any dollar figure or asset sheet, is what defines legacy.